Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV. I just want to welcome everyone into our live show. We're going to break down some of the most important and interesting issues and cases in policing from the last week or so. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel and make sure that you share it with friends and family. While I'm going through some of these stories today, one of our favorite things to do is to interact with our audience. So definitely comment so we can go back and forth and really get some different opinions on some of these cases. We're going to cover 3 different cases today, and the last 2 cases that we're going to cover have been pretty popular cases, controversial cases that have made at least some local and national news, and they're pretty controversial cases. So I know that as I go through them, that there's going to be some different opinions on these cases. Before we get to that, why don't you go ahead and put in the chat where you're watching from, so we know exactly who we have in the audience today. Again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me just about everywhere over at Police Law News. So listen, we were going to cover 3 cases today, and I had them all set, but one of the cases got bumped because there was a tragic case here in my home state of New Mexico earlier this morning. So that's what we're going to start out with today. And listen, I know that we're pretty much at a record almost every year. It seems like in this country we set the record for police officers who are shot and killed in the line of duty. And when it happens in your state, if you're a police officer or someone who just supports police officers in general, when it's an officer who dies in the line of duty and it's in your state or in the department that you work for, it always hits just a little bit harder. That's kind of what we found out today. New Mexico State Police reported early this morning that a New Mexico State police officer just outside of Tucumcari, New Mexico, was shot and killed in the line of duty. We don't have a whole lot of information, but here's what we know so far. So Tucumcari is just across. It's on the east side. It's on the east side of the state of New Mexico. It's just across the border from Texas. If you're familiar with the state of New Mexico at all, it's about 3 hours. It's about 3 hours east of Albuquerque. All we know so far is that there was a traffic stop during the traffic stop. The state police officer and this happened around 5:40 in the morning. During the traffic stop, the offender, he shot and killed the officer. We don't have any of the details. We do know that the offender is not in custody. The New Mexico State Police, on their Twitter page, they did go ahead and release some still photos from dash cam. So it looks like that the dash camera of the police car was running, and they didn't release any footage, but they did release some still frames of the individual. All we know so far is that he is not in custody, and as you can imagine, there is going to be a large police effort in order to catch this offender. And really, it's just we know that he is a black male adult. That's all the information that we have so far, and that's from the still photos that we had that have been released. State police tactical units from really all over the state have converged on the small town of Tucumcari, flooded the area. So my guess is he will be caught sooner rather than later. But anytime that you have a situation like this where you have someone who just killed a police officer, they're hiding, they really have nothing to lose. So this is a situation that is obviously really dangerous for the police officers, and there are going to be dozens, hundreds of likely hundreds of police officers who are going to descend to this area to do an area search in order to try to get this guy in custody. And I just have a message for them, and not just in this case, but in all cases where police officers are searching for dangerous offenders like this, where they have nothing to lose. And that message is kill them before they kill you. And it hits different, and every life is valuable, but it hits different when someone dies in the line of duty, someone who is out there protecting us, because the good guys aren't supposed to die. All right, so that's again, that was not how I wanted to start the day. Not how I wanted to start the day. I was looking to cover other cases. But we will keep you updated on that. My guess is by the time we're back here next week, hopefully in the next couple hours, this individual is apprehended by police. All right, so now we're going to get into the other cases. All right, so the other case that I've really been focusing on most of the week up until this morning is a case that happened in San Bernardino County, California. So I did a couple videos on this that I put up on TikTok and Instagram. I covered it a bunch on Twitter as well. And, it's every now and then I'll put up a video. I typically do daily content, but, every now and then I put up a video about a case and I write an article or something like that. And there's just a lot of feedback with people from both sides really going at it. And this is one of those cases. It has made national news, but those of us kind of in this space who cover these issues, really almost as soon as they happen, kind of in real time, it's really been taking over the last couple days or so. So let me explain to you what happened. So this happened on March 9th of this year in San Bernardino County, California. So essentially this started out with a call for service. Deputies with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office were sent to a home in reference to a domestic dispute. Essentially the remarks on the call were that the family called in reference to their 15-year-old son, Ryan Gaynor. Now, a couple things about Ryan. Ryan is 15 years old, and he has autism. Reportedly, is at least what was told to the 911 operator, that Ryan was attacking family members, including his younger sister, and he was smashing property inside the house. So deputies are dispatched to that call. At least 2 different deputies were dispatched to that call, which you would expect in order to go to a domestic disturbance like this. So when the deputies arrive on scene, they see a couple things. They pull up and they notice that the door to the house is wide open, which, isn't typical. Most of the time, even when there's a domestic dispute, the front door to the house isn't open. So, that's a little strange right there. Also, deputies could hear a commotion coming from right inside the house. As one of the deputies starts to approach the walkway to the front door, the deputy can see that there's basically broken glass. As he was approaching the front door, he could look inside the house and see just broken glass and just shit everywhere in the house. So, and the reason why I'm saying that is because a lot of times when people call 911 or they report things, from the person who calls to the call taker to the dispatch to the officer, it's kind of like a game of telephone. And sometimes, the information isn't always correct. Well, this is a case where, now police officers kind of have an idea that, maybe it's likely what was told to the 911 operator is what we have here, because they have a commotion inside and they could see broken glass pretty much everywhere inside of the open door. The police officer does start to yell as he's approaching the door. He doesn't walk into the house, and he yells, "Where is he?" Essentially because he can hear a commotion, and he's likely saying, where is Ryan? The individual who's causing these kinds of problems. It's reasonable for the police officer to ask that because the door is open. So maybe Ryan ran out of the house. Maybe he was in the backyard. Maybe he was at a neighbor's house. So the police officer, is pretty much the first thing that the deputy is trying to get a hold of is, where is Ryan? So he yells out, where is he? It's at that point that Ryan Gaynor, he basically just appears in the doorway, and he's holding a 5-foot long hula hoe. Now, I didn't know I could see this is all on body camera video, but I didn't know what a hula hoe was. But essentially, it's like a gardening tool, and that's how they've been describing it, which is a little dishonest, which, I'll get into kind of on the back end of this, but it's basically like a shovel with like a sharp blade at the end. Yeah, and I know what you're thinking. That hula ho sounds like a raunchy porn character. I get it, but it's like a shovel with a sharp blade at the end. It's 5 feet long. So that is a deadly weapon. I mean, the way that you have to look at whether or not something is a deadly weapon, it's a really easy question that you have to ask yourself. If someone bashes you in the head with this thing, are you going to die or suffer serious bodily injury? If the answer is yes, then we're going to go ahead and consider that a deadly weapon. Does it mean that it's always a deadly weapon? No, just like a baseball bat. Is every baseball bat, being used as a deadly weapon? No, of course not. But if someone is coming at you with a baseball bat, well then absolutely that would be considered a deadly weapon. Also, so what we have to think about here is another opinion to think about is that guns being turned into gardening tools and still being a deadly weapon. So what we have to think about here is that, as Ryan basically gets into the doorway of the house, he immediately starts to run at the cop holding this 5-foot long, basically the shovel. And the officer really doesn't have any time to react. And the officer at this point basically has two choices. The officer can either stand his ground, draw out, and, use some kind of force against Ryan, or the officer can try to gain distance to try to, hopefully do something by gaining distance. And that's what the police officer, the deputy right there, decides to do. He starts, as soon as Ryan starts chasing him with this 5-foot long shovel, the deputy immediately turns around, he draws out his handgun, and he starts running away. As he's running away, basically he's running for his life at this point. He's still saying, pretty reasonable things to Ryan. He tells him to stop, and then he says, if you don't stop, you're going to get shot. It's at that point another deputy on scene, who's kind of on the side. He recognizes that there's a deadly threat, that the one deputy is being chased by Ryan Gaynor, who is with a shovel, and he's pretty close to the deputy with this shovel, basically trying to knock his head off with this thing. And it's at that point that the deputy he recognizes a deadly threat, and he utilizes deadly force. He fires 3 times. Ryan is shot, and he is killed. And that's a pretty controversial thing because it's a 15-year-old. And listen, nobody wants a 15-year-old to die. I mean, that isn't the case here. But if we're looking at this from a legal aspect, basically the way we look at this is, was there a reasonable belief that the police officer was in danger of death or great bodily injury? So that's the question. And the answer is, of course, yes. Of course, the answer is yes. So obviously, this is a legal officer-involved shooting. There's a couple, besides just, having, you don't even have to have a law degree. You don't have to be a police officer. Just common sense. You can watch this and say, well, I mean, of course, that's a legal officer-involved shooting. And that's a reasonable use of force. And, there's another way that that this is probably a legal use of force as well. So California is one of those states that really isn't great when it comes to releasing body camera video. Think about this. How long did it take for us here at Cop Watch TV? We tried to get the footage. News organizations all around the country tried to get the footage of the Paul Pelosi case in California, and it took months. It took months in order to get all of that stuff. And I just should say that, when Kamala Harris was Attorney General, she was one of the ones who basically set that policy to make it really difficult to get body camera footage. There's a couple states where it's hard to get body camera footage. California and Texas, it's difficult for news organizations to get body camera footage. Other states, it's actually really easy to get body camera footage. New Mexico, for example, is great. Florida is great. Arizona as well. But California is one of those states where, it's not easy to get body camera footage and they usually hold it up. However, this body camera footage was released within 2 days, 48 hours after the officer-involved shooting, and this body camera footage was public. So you have to look at it this way. So people from the sheriff's department and the attorneys and the politicians who run the sheriff's department saw the body camera footage and they were like, oh yeah, this is gonna exonerate us. Let's get this shit out quick. Which is what they should do. I mean, in my opinion, as I've said before, I like transparency. Yes, of course, I'm here on a body camera channel, but it just for transparency, it's always preferable that whether it shows police officers in a good light or in a bad light, what we care about is truth. What we care about is what really happened. And so, no matter how it is, we want that body camera footage out as quickly as possible. But again, when they release it within 48 hours, especially in California, you have to know, okay, they saw this and they know this exonerates the police officer, and it absolutely does. So, so what's the problem with this case? So why is it controversial? That's a good question because again, the body camera footage is out there. It's not like I'm describing something that that I saw no one else has access to. No, the body camera footage is completely out there. The body camera footage, and it's not like the police officer was there and was negotiating with Ryan and he was kind of standing there and milling around and tried to walk away. No. Like police officers actually weren't even able to have any kind of contact or the dialogue with him, because as soon as he stepped into the doorway, he immediately, within a second, started to chase after the police officer with this giant shovel. So again, it's like there's no way for an officer to de-escalate that situation at all. So again, we have video of it. So what's the problem with this case? So the reason that the problem with this case is how it's being described. So there's a news organization called Democracy Now! Between Instagram and Twitter. They have nearly 2 million people who follow them. And here was their headline. Listen to what their headline was. Their headline said, in San Bernardino County, east of Los Angeles, a 15-year-old black teenager with autism was shot dead Saturday at his home by a sheriff's deputy. Ryan Gaynor reportedly was holding a gardening tool when he was fatally shot by a deputy. Reportedly holding a gardening tool. Now, this article from Democracy Now! Came out after the body camera footage was released. So that's my question. So there are millions of people who are out there who are only going to read that headline, that a 15-year-old black kid with autism, was reportedly, we're not even sure if it happened. He just reportedly was holding a gardening tool when he was shot by a police officer. First of all, he wasn't just holding it, he was chasing an officer with it. And he definitely did it. And also, it's a little, and they call it a gardening tool. Now, when you say gardening tool, that's a little disingenuous, because a gardening tool could be anything. Again, this was like a 5-foot-long shovel. So the idea that it is that they are trying to create a narrative out there. It's like saying, oh, he was armed with just a small knife or a pocket knife. Well, we have video of this. We know what this thing looks like. So that's the problem. That's really why I've been on this case, because again, there's millions of people who will read that description and will have it in their heads that police officers, sheriff's deputies in San Bernardino, California, shot a 15-year-old black kid with autism because he was holding a gardening tool. Again, that is incredibly dishonest. It's difficult to have a reasonable conversation with people or a debate with people if they're going to be so biased like that. And I think that's just it's pretty it's a ridiculous thing. So now let's talk about some of the issues. So again, I said I did go back and forth on social media with people on this case throughout the week, and there were a couple different themes, questions, comments that people had. And the first one, and this is a question that I've answered a lot of times, and I don't mind answering this question, because here's the thing. If you don't know something, if you don't have any education, training, or experience on a subject, it's my opinion, again, everyone has free speech, but it's my opinion that, you should more ask questions instead of make, very confident statements. Here's what I mean by that. I have zero experience when it comes to being in auto, when it comes to fixing cars. I have zero experience. I also have zero experience when it comes to baking. So the example that I use is, it would be strange for me to watch a YouTube video on an auto worker who is, fixing a carburetor, and for me to say that he's doing something wrong. Again, I have no education or experience on this, but, so it's like I would be in a position where I would go ahead and ask questions. I wouldn't make confident statements, especially when the person on the other side, has 20 years of experience. But it's weird with policing, because people have watched Training Day 58 times. They think that they're experts in policing with no education or experience to back it up. But so that's why I appreciate when people ask questions instead of just make, confident, ridiculous, and bold statements. And one of those questions is, well, why didn't the police officer use a taser? That's actually a reasonable question, and I'd like to answer that question. So here's why a taser would not be the appropriate weapon system. So we're going to start at the beginning of this. So tasers fail to have the desired effect, meaning, work for one reason or another, about 40% of the time. There's a study done by APM Reports on in Los Angeles between 2016 and 2019, covering hundreds of applications of tasers, and they found that about 40% of the time tasers don't work or don't have the desired effect. Now, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the taser. Taser is a great company, and in my opinion, Taser is the best less lethal option that police officers currently have, and it's not close. So it's not always the device's fault. The reason why is if someone is wearing heavy clothing, that it's in the taser prongs, like, so I have a sweater on and then I have a t-shirt on underneath. If the taser prongs get me in the sweater here, I'm probably going to be affected. But let's say I have on a big winter jacket. If I have on a big winter jacket and those probes hit the winter jacket, it isn't a guarantee it's going to have the desired effect. Also, basically the way to think about it is when you press the trigger on a taser, two different prongs come out. So basically it's not like a firearm where a police officer has to hit you with one projectile. The officer has to hit you with two projectiles. So basically, when you're aiming at two different aim points. So you have to think about it this way. So you have a moving target, a police officer who's under stress. So trying to hit a moving target under stress with two different points, that's a really difficult thing to do. That plus the fact that, again, that if you're wearing heavy clothing, that, it may not have the desired effect anyways. Those are some of the reasons. So again, we know that there's a 40% chance that, the taser isn't going to have the desired effect. Well, if we all agree that this is a life or death situation, for lack of a better term, again, someone has a shovel, they're chasing you, they're really close, and they're trying to hit you, basically bash your brains in with a shovel. So is that a situation where the officer is in immediate threat of dying or great bodily injury? Well, I would say yes. So now, if you're saying that the officer should have used a taser, basically what you're saying is that if you use a taser in a situation like that, let's say the taser doesn't work, is there time to transition to a firearm? Well, probably not, because we know how long that takes. We know from holding a taser to drawing a firearm, coming up on target and firing one shot, we know that takes almost 2 seconds. That has been studied by multiple different people, including Force Science. So that takes approximately, it's like 1.75 seconds. And that's if you hit with the first shot. 1.75 seconds. So again, is that enough time if the taser doesn't work? Well, again, if someone is, just about to be smashed in the head with a shovel, I mean, that's probably not enough time to transition from one weapon system to another. So if you say that the officer should have utilized the taser, basically what you're saying is that, hey, if we use the taser, there's a 40% chance that the officer is going to have his head bashed in with a shovel, and that is what we want police officers to do. And obviously that's insane. There is no police training anywhere in the United States that would say that is the appropriate level of force. Here's where a taser would have been. Let's say Ryan exited the house, he's holding that shovel, and he's standing there. Let's say police officers tell him to put the shovel down, he's refusing, but so basically, like, he's holding the shovel, but he hasn't actively attacked them yet. That's when police officers use a taser. That's when a taser is appropriate, because he's standing there, he's hopefully not moving, and he's not actively attacking. At that point, if there was that, I mean, that didn't happen in this case, but if that police officer, if the officer or the deputy is able to tase him in that moment, then Ryan would fall down. He'd be under power for at least 5 seconds. Police officers can run up, get him into handcuffs, and then he's safe and he's not going to hurt anyone. And most importantly, Ryan and the officers are alive. So that's when a taser is appropriate. Again, when someone is bearing down on you with a blunt object, that is not a case where any trainer in the United States or any police department in the United States is going to tell police officers, yeah, you know what, we think a taser is the appropriate thing to do. And that's what I always look at. If you question what the police officer did, go ahead and question. But if you want to criticize what the police officer did, I think it's important to say, I criticize the police officer for not doing to this, and then cite to some authority, cite to training, cite to policy, cite to law. And if you can do this, say, hey, Dan, you know what, I think you're wrong, because here's some training that all police officers have, and there's best practices say to do this, and the cop did this. Let's have a discussion there, because that's at least an honest criticism of what the police officers did. If you just say, well, the officers should have used a taser, again, like that's coming. The only people who say that, essentially, look at it this way. Literally 100% of the people who say that have zero police training or experience. So, I mean, that should tell you something right there. The other thing that I want to say on this is that, there were a lot of different people. So taser is spelled Taser. There were a lot of people who commented on my post throughout the week who basically said, who spelled it wrong, who spelled it Tazer. And, I kind of just have a rule. So one of my rules that I like to go by is if you spell the name of the weapon system incorrectly, I'm just not going to listen to you, because it's obvious you've never tried to use the weapon system or have any training or education experience with it. The other thing that people are saying about this is that, well, he had autism. So, and they kind of go into a thing where they describe, well, when you have autism and you're having and you're in one of these things, like, you may not realize what's going on. And that's the reason that he's acting like that. And listen, I get that, and we should have sympathy for that. The problem is that as a police officer is coming on scene, and someone is charging at him, trying to bash him in the head with a shovel, again, the police officer can't say, oh, you know what? Yeah, this guy might have autism. He might have something going on. I'll let him knock my head off. I mean, that isn't a thing. Again, that's ridiculous. We should have compassion there. And maybe if there is a fix when it comes to this, maybe, when the person calls 911, maybe different officers can be dispatched, crisis intervention and stuff like that. But again, I'm going to say it again. No matter what police officer is there, if Ryan runs out and that's what he has, and he's chasing two officers with a shovel, this is going to be the result. The only way around this is to dispatch maybe like 6 officers. 2 of them have beanbag shotguns. 1 of them has a taser. 1 of them has a 40, and 2 are less lethal. So if you can again, it's nice to talk about this in 2020 hindsight, right? So if police officers had 6 different officers, they're all set up perfectly on the house, right where Ryan was going to come out. Again, but police officers aren't psychic. Also, police officers aren't staffed or funded to send 6 different officers with all these different weapon systems to every single domestic violence call, right? So it's just that just isn't possible. But it's weird, because the same people who want to defund the police are the same people who are saying that the police should have done something different here. When again, I'm telling you what it would take. It would take 6 different police officers set up around the house with different types of less lethal weapon systems, which is more money for these weapon systems and more money to get these officers trained on them, for that many of them to have them. And again, in a place like San Bernardino County, there may only be 10 officers on shift at one time in the entire county. And again, this isn't the only call. You can't send 6 cops to every single call. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Let's see. Cajun Randy says 2 cops can't something a shovel away from a guy without multiple weapon systems. Yeah, you're right, Randy. They can't. And again, Cajun Randy, if you think that it's easy to disarm a violent 15-year-old who is trying to attack you and only a couple feet away from you with a shovel, if you think that's an easy thing to do, I would just say go ahead and try it and let me know how it goes. It's not going to end up well. And this is an unfortunate situation. But really, the police officers had no choice. There was nothing else they can do. This is obviously a legal and reasonable officer-involved shooting. Let's see. I don't think I have any other. I don't have any other thoughts on that case, but we're going to go ahead and follow it. But again, my prediction is this is going to be found to be a legal and a reasonable officer-involved shooting, and there really isn't any question about it. Again, if Ryan is standing with a shovel and he's 20 feet away from the cops and no one else is in danger, and if officers utilize deadly force at that point, well, of course that's not going to be accurate. But again, if you're running at someone with a shovel with reasonable intent to do them harm, that's a deadly force situation. And again, if you think I'm wrong, I'm good with it. Point to the law, point to the policy, point to the training that back up your claim. That's all I can say about that. All right, so the last case that we're going to cover here, and this case it didn't really make national news. Maybe it did for like a day or so. I thought it was going to be a little more I thought this was going to get a little more traction, but I've got some pretty strong feelings on this as well. So this happened in New Bern, North Carolina. So basically, this is a case about a police officer pushing an old woman. There's videos of it everywhere. I put one on my TikTok earlier today. So basically, New Bern, Connecticut, and what happened was police officers were arresting a 50-year-old guy named Christopher Hunings. It's Hunnings. Maybe it's Hunnings. I don't know. Let's call him Christopher. So police officers were arresting Christopher, and he had multiple outstanding felony warrants, including a warrant that had been issued the day before for possession of fentanyl. So we know that he's an upstanding guy. So police officers, this basically starts where police officers make contact with Christopher in a parking lot, and they're trying to arrest him. And instead of cooperating like a reasonable person, because if he did, then we would never be talking about this case, because literally tens of thousands of people are arrested every single day across the country. They don't resist arrest, and we never hear about those cases. So the 99.9% of cases, really it's like 97%. So like 97% of cases, police officers don't use any force to arrest, and it is 100% based on the actions of the person that they are arresting. But this is one of those 3% of cases that, are interesting and controversial, so we're going to go ahead and cover it. So basically, police officers are trying to arrest Christopher, and instead of cooperating like a reasonable person would do, he resists arrest. He fights with police officers. He starts kicking at them. Not only does he threaten that he's going to kill, not only is he going to, so real quick, DL says, so basically they've done studies, and what they have found, D, is that police officers use force in 3% of arrests. So about 3% of arrests, police officers have to use some kind of force in order to get those people into arrest. I should also say of that 3%, 70% of that is police officers only using their hands. So 70% of the 3%, police officers don't have to use tasers, batons, mace, firearms, anything like that. 97% of arrests around the country are conducted without police officers using any force. And again, so 3% of the time people resist arrest. That's what all the research says. So that's where I'm getting that number from. So not only was Christopher, resisting arrest, kicking at police officers, threatening to kill the police officers, he was also threatening to kill every member of the police department, which again isn't a real threat because not every member of the police department right there. So it's more silly than anything. It was at that point that Christopher's elderly mother, her name is Othelia, not Ophelia, Othelia. She's in her 80s. For some reason she must have got the idea in her head, something to the effect of like, I just haven't enabled him enough his first 50 years of life. What else can I do? I'm going to go ahead and get involved in this arrest. So police officers are in a parking lot fighting with Christopher to get him into handcuffs. I should point out that Christopher also has a pocket knife, and one of the things that he's doing is he's trying to reach for that pocket knife as police officer tried to get him into custody. So Othelia thought it was a good idea to inject herself into this. She basically walks right over to the police officers. She hovers over them, and she starts touching the police officers as they're trying to get him into handcuffs. He's still reaching for the knife. They're trying to get him into handcuffs. An officer tells her multiple times to go away, and she refuses. She tells the officer no. It's at that point one of the police officers takes his hand, and he kind of gives her a light push. And she falls down like LeBron James in the fourth quarter. At first it looked like a flop, because the first time I saw the video, I'm like, oh, this is ridiculous. This person is flopping. This is insane. But then I learned that it was like an elderly person. I go, no, that's probably what an 86-year-old would look like if you lightly push them. So she falls down on the ground. Police officer able to get get Christopher into handcuffs. He has no injuries, which is good. Police officers have no injuries, and the 86-year-old doesn't have any injuries either. There's some controversy of this about what the police officers should do, and those are the kinds of questions I'd like to answer. So what should the police officers do? So they're trying to get a guy into handcuffs. He's reaching for a knife. You can't let him get that knife, right? So I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say that Cajun and Randy, I'll answer that question here in a second. That's a really good question, sir. I don't think that the police officers, were physically afraid of the 86-year-old woman. I'm just going to go out on a limb. Okay, I haven't called them on the phone or texted with them. I'm just going to assume that they weren't physically afraid of the 86-year-old woman. My guess is what the police officers were thinking is that, if we're having to deal with her and talk to her, we can't concentrate on getting this guy into handcuffs. Because again, once he gets possession of that knife, now we're in a situation where it could be a deadly force situation. And police officers are trying to avoid that. The last thing they want is for him to get a knife, because at that point, it might turn into a deadly force situation, which nobody wants. So again, is this how I wanted things to end? No. I wish that Othelia never would have approached the police officers, because it's absolutely insane to do that. So, and also it's actually more dangerous for her. So think about it. He is kicking and thrashing. Police officers are trying to get someone into custody, and now they have to worry about an 86-year-old woman who is standing there, who might be knocked over, she might be kicked, she could be hit by a police officer. Who knows if a police officer is pushed into her? What I can guarantee you is that if she got pushed over during the arrest while cops are fighting with this guy, it would be way more violent, and she would have way more injury than like one light push away. So again, it doesn't look great. I get it, but she was, in my opinion, she was in far more danger being that close to someone who was resisting arrest than to just being pushed over. So I'm 100% good with this. The lesson to learn is that the lesson to learn on this is you're just never too old to learn something new. Okay, so I don't know if we have any questions on that, but Cajun Randy actually had a good question. I'm going to kind of answer here ad hoc. Kind of at the top of my head, Cajun Randy asked for my prediction on the Brian North case. So I wrote an article on the Brian North case on my Substack about a year ago, probably over a year ago, when I first heard about this case. I've covered the case multiple times, including on the show, but obviously I don't expect you to go back and look at shows for a year ago. So let me do this really quick, Randy. So basically, Trooper Brian North, and Randy, please correct me if I'm wrong. Trooper Brian North, it's a Connecticut State Trooper. The individual's name is Mulbarak Soleimani. I think I'm correct on that. Essentially, what happened, from the best of my memory, even though this was over a year ago, is Mr. Soleimani. He committed some kind of a robbery over at a cell phone store. Then he stole a car, and now he's driving the stolen car. Police officers try to stop him. He refuses. It's a chase. He starts crashing into cars. They allow the chase to go on. Eventually, a police officer crashes or uses a pit maneuver. Somehow, they were able to disable the vehicle. So now Mr. Soleimani, he is in the front seat of the vehicle. He has a knife in his hand, and he's basically surrounded by police officers. So essentially, what happened is Trooper Brian North, he is kind of on the driver's side, think about it, he's like on the driver's side, but closer to the front of the car, and there's two other officers who are on the passenger side of the car. So Mr. Soleimani, he's in the front seat of the car with a knife, and he's kind of waving it and stuff like this. What ends up happening is that the two police officers who are on the passenger side, they have a plan to open the passenger side door. And this actually isn't a bad idea. So here was the plan. The plan was that they were going to open the passenger side door, and then once the door was open, they were going to utilize a taser, basically shoot the taser at him. He would drop the knife, hopefully, right? I mean, if it works, it fails 40% of the time. But, when he's in a car, he's kind of contained, right? So, they're going to open the door. They're going to shoot him with the taser. He's going to be incapacitated. And then once he drops the knife, that they will be able to get him into custody. And Cajun Randy just said, yeah, the car door was locked, so it actually wasn't the door. So that's what I got wrong, Randy. It was actually the window. So I think they bash out the window, correct? But basically, Cajun Randy, I think again, I haven't talked about this case in over a year, but I think the idea was, so they were going to shoot him with the taser, not through the door, but they were going to shoot him. They were going to shoot him with the taser through the open window. He'd be incapacitated. They'd be able to get him into custody. So basically, what happens is, as far as I can tell, is that from where Trooper North was standing, he was able to see the two officers do that. Well, so the officers, kind of like start going towards the window. window, and as they go towards the window, they kind of go out of his view. Just from where he's standing, like with the car blocking it, they kind of go out of his view, and he's not looking directly at those officers. It's kind of in his peripheral vision. He's mostly looking at Mr. Soleimani, who's in the car. And as he's doing this, that's when Mr. Soleimani takes the knife and he starts going like this with the knife. So Trooper Brian North, what he thought, from what we gather, is what Trooper North thought is that the officers, because he couldn't see them anymore, what he thought is that the officers had entered the car, and now they're entering the car, and Mr. Soleimani is doing this. That's what he thought. So he fired a bunch of shots at Mr. Soleimani and killed him. The thing is that the two other officers, they never entered the car. He was mistaken on that fact. Just the way it was is that they kind of like ducked down behind the car, and it made it so Trooper North no longer could see them. That happened at the exact same time that Soleimani started like being really animated with the knife. So Trooper North thought that those two officers were in danger. In reality, they weren't. He didn't know that at the time. So at the time I wrote this article over a year ago, Cajun Randy, my prediction is that Trooper North was going to be found guilty. I do not think that it was a reasonable, objectively reasonable officer-involved shooting. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say that he is going to be convicted. I think it's involuntary manslaughter. I'm not sure what the exact charges are, but my guess is he will be convicted. And I know I disagree with a lot of people in the police community about this. I've talked with a bunch of them offline. And I honestly don't think that this was an objectively reasonable officer-involved shooting. I don't think it was. So, anyways, the good question, Cajun Randy. My prediction is that he's going to be convicted of something. Don't know what, but we'll probably have that for you guys next week. All right, so that's going to be the show. I really appreciate everybody coming in today. I really appreciate the questions, the comments. And again, I like it when we disagree. I think that's interesting. I can't say it enough, though. If we disagree, and if you think a police officer did something wrong, again, you have free speech. But what I think is the most interesting is if you say why. If you say why you think the officer should have done that, just like I did with the Brian North case. So I don't think that officer, Brian North, should have utilized his firearm at that point. I wrote an entire article of why this whole thing could, I think that should have been avoided. So I think that's kind of the important criticism to have, is to, criticize police officers and then say, this is what I think they should have done, and then point to some kind of authority. All right, so I hope everyone has a great and safe weekend. Again, hoping that the individual who killed the police officer in New Mexico, hopefully he's caught here pretty soon. We'll have an update on that the next time we're on with you guys. But please, everybody have a safe weekend, and if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.